In this tutorial, I show you how to move, rotate, and scale objects. So let's just go ahead and start by creating a box. And this works for moving, rotating, and scaling anything. So not just boxes and geometry, but also lights or cameras, even materials. When you start to apply materials, you can move, rotate, and scale how the texture map fits on the material. So in this case, we'll use our move, rotate, scale tools. As I mentioned in the first video, a lot of tools or a lot of the interface is redundant. So I can either use my move, rotate, scale icons here, or I can go to edit and I can hit move, rotate, or scale there, or I can even right click and access my move, rotate, and scale through the pop-up menu. So it's really up to you how you like to work. You can, if you look here, you can see that there's actually some shortcuts too. So W is move and E is rotate, but I tend to prefer just using these icons up here. So the first one is the move. You'll notice you have what's called a gizmo here, and if you hover over any of the arms, the X, Y, or Z, you can move in that direction. So if I hover over the Z, it'll move up. If I hover over the Y, it'll move in the Y direction. And right now I'm just kind of doing it based on where I want to move it visually, but if you want to start doing it very precisely, down here below the viewport you have the X, Y, and Z inputs, so I can actually type in here like 0, enter, and then you can hit tab to actually go to the next input window. 0, enter, tab, 0, enter, and that will center the object in the 0, 0, 0 of the world grid. If I move this, like, let's say 5 feet over, you'll see that it remains at 5 feet. If I want to change that, if I hover over this to the absolute mode, this will move it based on its current location. So if I just want to move it, you can see it re-zeros everything. If I just want to move it now 1 foot over, it's going to go left because that's the direction the arrow is pointing. I can type in 1 foot, enter, and it moves it 1 foot over. If I want to move it 2 feet back, I can type in -2 feet, enter, and it moves it 2 feet in the other way. Every time I move it, it re-zeros this. So if you want to go back to the world coordinate system, you could de-highlight that, and it goes back to the world. So you can see I'm at 4 feet, 0 feet, and 0 feet. Now, one thing that's pretty useful is actually changing where that pivot is located. And to do that, you go to your hierarchy tab over here on the right, and you can actually select Affect Pivot Only and move just the pivot. So not the actual object, but just the pivot. Let's say I want it to be over here, for example. I can then deselect Affect Pivot Only, and now when I move, and I can use the arrows, by the way, or type in values, you can see it's moving it based on that new pivot location. The next option is rotate. So if I select my rotate tool, you can see it's still using that moved pivot, so it's going to rotate around that point. If I want to recenter my pivot, I just go back to my hierarchy tab, select Affect Pivot Only, and I can center it back to the object. And that will relocate it. That actually locates it right in the center of the object, or you can reset the pivot, which takes it back to its original position. So you can actually do this on the fly and change things as you move, rotate, and scale objects, but it works very much the same way as move, that I hover over these little gizmo arms and I can rotate around the Z, rotate around the X, or rotate around the Y. One thing to note, if you select the move tool, and this is true of the move, rotate, or scale, if I hover over 2, like in between the Z and the X arm, it'll move in the Z and X simultaneously. If I select right in the center, it'll actually move in all 3 directions simultaneously. And that's true for rotate too. So if I hover over those 2 arms, it'll rotate in those 2 directions. If I hover in the center, it rotates around all 3 directions or axes. The scale tool is very similar. If I select scale, I can scale it in just the X direction, or in 2 directions, or in all 3 directions. Again, your X, Y, and Z inputs become active, so I could always type in a value. Let's say I want it to be 200% or twice as big. I could type in 200, enter, and that will scale it twice as big. So those are the basic tools for move, rotate, scale. There's some other things we'll talk about later, but that's the basics. And that, again, it works not only for objects, it works for all objects, but it also works on other kinds of objects like cameras and lights and even materials and textures.